I'm Mike Stanton. It's October 9th. This is the BAM Weekly Muni Market Update. I'm here with Grant Dewey and Brian Babler from BAM's Capital Markets Desk. Gentlemen, thanks for being here with us. So this week we saw some interesting shifts in the market as some large deals priced and had impacts on other trading values across the market. Grant, why don't you talk us through that?
So munis were up slightly again this week, Mike, which is pretty much in line with what we saw in treasuries. But we've seen, so far in October, we've just seen kind of steady rise in yields, anywhere from 12 to 15 basis points across the curve. We're also, given the recent spike in COVID-19 cases and some of the inaction around fiscal policy, there's been a little bit more muni price volatility and some additional spread widening. Last Friday, New York City GOs were downgraded by Moody's. They had a deal this week, which ended up doing very well, but spreads had to widen quite a bit to get investor interest. So there was a New York City deal done back in early March, that came at spreads of about 55 basis points over MMD on the long fours, and that same structure, essentially the same bond, was priced this week at 100 over, so nearly twice the spreads to generate interest on the cities. Also, the largest deal of the week was a New York State dorm PIT deal, personal income tax, and that deal back in early March was trading 7 or 8 basis points off AAA MMD. And the deal, there were several deals this week, but in 10 years, BAM will price their 10-year maturity at plus 50. So there has been a repricing in the market. We do anticipate that there's going to be continued volatility here in Q4. Another interesting thing is that the investor flows turned positive again this week. I mean, they've been largely positive. It's been almost 25 billion year to date, even with that very ugly period in March and April in terms of outflows. But flows turned, Lipper reported 1.7 billion in inflows after having a down number last week, which I think is probably the only down number we had seen in quite a while. So it's things are getting interesting as we near the election. There's a lot more issuance, as Brian will get into, but there's also increased volatility, which generally is good for the bond insurers. I mean, we've been running penetration at around 8.5% for most of the year, and that's in recent history has been closer to 6%. So we continue to be very happy with the volumes we're seeing in both the primary and secondary.
And as we've been saying for a couple of months really now, there's also been more activity in higher rated and larger transactions that previously might have gone without insurance that are getting them. And there's the billboard example of that on BAM's new issue calendar this week. Brian, you want to take us through that?
Sure. Yeah. On the new issue side, as Grant mentioned, really solid supply for the broader market. We saw over 16 billion price, particularly on the exempt side, where there was more than 11 billion that came to market. So, as Grant mentioned, that definitely puts a little bit of pressure on funds coming in, being a little bit more selective on where they're putting that fresh cash to work. So really, that was dominated by some of the larger issues. Grant mentioned the two New York deals, which garnered a lot of the attention. But away from that, for BAM, we had a very active week. As you were mentioning, we priced our first index eligible taxable bond, and that was for a AA3 underlying rated Oregon State University. BAM will priced that deal yesterday, came at a spread of plus 185 to the long bond. That carried a 10-year par call and matures in 40 years. So really nice transaction, especially with the underlying rating. In addition to that, we were also used on 97 million for Eastside USD. That was another taxable transaction that was priced by UBS, and that also carried a AA3 underlying rating. In the competitive space, 5 of the transactions that we were used on carried at least AA minus ratings, including a $25 million deal for Anacortes Utilities in Washington, which also qualified for BAM's Green Star designation. So continued trend. We keep seeing insurance make sense on higher rated credits, and as Graham mentioned, penetration really ticking up. With the two deals that I mentioned, in total we insured over 620 million in the primary market this week. So really solid result.
I think it just a shade under the busiest week in BAM's history. So congratulations for that. One thing to note also on the green bond market is Refinitiv this week published their quarterly report. They showed that there's been $13.3 billion of municipal green bond sales year to date. That's already an all-time high for a full year. So we're in record territory on the green bond market and continuing to stretch that lead. And BAM Green Star is certainly an active part of that. Brian, looking ahead to next week, what's on tap?
Another busy week, probably about 14, maybe a little bit over 14 billion or so scheduled to come to market. On the BAM side, we expect to be very active with probably north of 200 to 250 scheduled to sell right now. Some of the highlights there are going to be 53 million for Burleigh County sales tax in North Dakota, as well as 38 million Cherokee Metro District in Colorado, and 33 million Morgantown, West Virginia, combined utilities bonds. So very active week. We plan to put a lot of bids on a decent number of competitive sales, and the negotiated side should be very active.
And Burleigh County is the county around Bismarck, the state capital of North Dakota. It's a multi-county sales tax, so it's a somewhat complex credit, but that's where BAM's underwriters always excel. So thanks for joining us this week. We'll watch the results of new sales and come back next week.
Thanks very much, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
When the market is unpredictable, BAM gives you certainty. In the face of market volatility and illiquidity, BAM insured municipal bonds deliver default protection, value preservation, and a durable AA rating from S&P. BAM's insurance protects against everything that causes a default, and adding BAM insured municipal bonds to your portfolio is easy. Talk to your investment advisor. Visit buildamerica.com or look for BAM eligible bonds on the Perform Portfolio Management System. BAM. Build America Mutual.